questions you have about predictive analytics, you can think of this as the free consulting segment of our webinar. It's open access to the modeling agency's advanced analytic gurus, but you're down to me now. Again, Keith had to return to a client. Scott, he may be back in if he can break through, but so far he's not been able to dial in. And again, you guys all have the secret tickets here. Somehow you you should get what's it called, ethical hacking award or certificate for making it in when so many others have not been able to. You're only going to get one perspective for this Q&A segment. I apologize for that, but I do have some great things to say, I believe, for one of the questions that came in. Now, we did get one by email. It's a popular question. This one's from Katharina. It is, will we be sharing the presentation deck? The only reason we don't is we want to encourage live participation. So if you want to pick up this content again, we offer it monthly. The standard presentation doesn't change very much. Where you would get unique value is to hang out until the Q&A, but you get reinforcement if you want to come back and see the presentation again with the full context, beyond the slides. You get all of the presentation content as well. So if you want to see the slides again, come back next month. Just go to the webinar page at our website and sign up for the next 3 months' productions will be listed there. The next question, this is fantastic. I think there's a couple of questions within the one. This comes from Karen. And by the way, this is the last one. I can expand to fit until the bottom of the hour here. But if another question comes in, I'll certainly make sure to work that in before the half hour is up. Thanks again for, I know it's almost taboo to schedule a webinar for 90 minutes. That's a large chunk of your day to take out. I'm very grateful for all of you who have maintained throughout to the end here with pretty much perfect retention. So Karen asks, do you think there's a lot of hype with regard to analytics? Firms don't have clear requirements as to what they want in a candidate, yet the bar is set so high. So I'm going to separate that into two parts. And the first part is, do you think there's a lot of hype with regard to analytics? I think a lot of that comes into expectations as well. Where are they? And I think there's a lot of different areas. So let me look at analytics broadly and say that, analytics hype, and I've been working in the analytics industry since 1990, so I've seen this general trend toward analytic adoption. I think there's forces toward and against adopting analytics. They almost balance each other out, but fortunately, continual reports of some organizations getting substantial rewards with analytics, as well as you just can't live without it. Everyone is becoming more data-driven these days. You can't avoid collecting data. You can't avoid progressing through the analytic maturity chain of interpreting data through, just queries in SQL, to doing exploratory, to doing statistical analysis, some of that rear view mirror kind of analysis, to eventually graduating to predictive. But what's been holding it back from really going forward further are most of the strategic blunders. We've talked about a few of them in this webinar. We talk about so many more through the training that we offer. But most organizations are developing more than adequate models, and they're staffing those who are very capable actually in machine learning and artificial intelligence. And like Keith had said in his presentation, these projects aren't failing because they're failing to find patterns or finding interesting insights. They're failing because they're not aligning those insights with organizational priorities, or they're not understanding in advance how to deploy, or they didn't know that the culture was not going to be receptive to analytics. I mean, in some ways you can change the culture. In other ways, it's just not going to change. Isn't it good to know in advance with a thorough assessment before you embark on trying to be, run from a data-driven perspective than from gut level, when leadership wasn't going to take their hands off the wheel and allow this automated system to go, or there could have been ways to do it. And we can find that out in an assessment where we can run it as a trial, start to get trust in the data-driven system. And there might be subject matter experts who feel threatened that there's now going to be this machine making the decisions that they used to make. Well, if they understood that this frees them up to be more valuable to the organization, because now they can be more creative with their expertise rather than making the same mundane decisions over and over, but those decisions can include the complexity that a predictive model can look at from a complex solution space and be able to score these decisions and be able to run them in a much more automated but intelligent fashion. And the SME can help to guide how those rules are affected and treated for an automated system. They end up being more valuable to the organization. So those are some of the things that these kinds of soft skills come into play that really makes analytics not just live up to the expectation. But here's what's interesting about the hype around analytics. I think it's both understated and overstated. And I'll get to the overstated here in a moment. But where it's understated is when analytics is properly applied, we like to have a threshold of expectations of at least tenfold. That's 1,000% ROI. And it's not unrealistic. When we plan, when we do a thorough assessment and do the proper planning, we often get back returns that are well over 10x of investment in analytics. And the results for case examples are so concentrated that I almost feel sheepish, like the results sound sensationalized, and they're not. But it's because we didn't just go in to look at what's the level of model accuracy that we can get out of this. It's, how can we make sure that it aligns with the complex environment in the organization, that we've collaborated with other experts with the data to understand what are other resources available, internal and external. What can we enrich that can empower the analytics that we do? How are we going to operationalize it and ensure that the measures that we get are understandable by leadership so it can be adopted? Once those things are looked at, the returns on predictive analytics, the insights it can give, the concentration of just in say a CRM campaign, a mailing. We've had some that would kind of centrifuge the responders, 80% of them into the first decile. That's probably one of our better runs. But can you imagine where you don't have to mail 60% of your file because there's no more gain back, and that's how much the predictive analytics can concentrate results. So let me get to the second part. What about firms that don't have clear requirements as to what they want in the candidate, and yet the bar is set so high? So I think I know what you mean, Karen, about the bar being set high, and what I'm going to argue is that it's the wrong bar. And let me, because you were able to send that question in advance, I was able to, while Keith was doing his presentation, pull up an illustration, because I'm going to talk about a couple of different bars. It's the one where they set it very high, and you're right, many of them not only don't know how to define the data scientists that they're looking for, but there's so many data scientists out there that are, they're self-proclaimed. And I've always had a problem with the term science. Science to me means that there's a scientific method, there's testing, there's peer review, there's a process, there's a formal process involved for science, and the way that data science is treated, I think most just concern knowing deep mathematics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, that makes them a scientist. Well, you also need process and testing. But the other part is that they really lack soft skills. So let me bring up this. I'm going to speak to this slide here. Hopefully you can see it. It's called the Data Scientist Path to Analytics Leadership. And you'll see where I think the bar that most organizations set that's pretty high is on the technical expertise side, the left side of this illustration, where they have an expectation for a lot of experience in coding and Python and understanding business intelligence and data visualization, deep understanding of mathematics and certainly statistics, and machine learning. What are the latest AI methods and techniques? And that's where they set the bar. And they feel that if you've got a great depth of experience on that side, you're going to succeed. And what that says to me is that you're going to do well as say, a mechanic. Oh, the slide's not showing. Yeah, you're right. My audience view says it's not showing here, and that's a shame because this is a great illustration. Let me see. It's because I've got other things in front of it. So let me try to make the window smaller. This really makes a good point here, this slide. Hopefully now I've got nothing else in front of it. Let's look. Oh, good. Okay, it should be showing now. Thanks, Karen. So another comment coming in here. Okay, great. Thanks, Ricky. So that's where the bar is set high. And what we're lacking are the soft skills and the leadership traits to really find value in the analytics. And project experience, the reason why, and so there's two bars here that we're looking at in the illustration. One is the increasing value to the organization as a data scientist steps through this maturity path or this experience path. And the other one is the total data scientist population. And there's so many polls that I see out there that talk about this extreme shortage of data scientists, how much, there's so much demand for all the data that's out there, for all the organizations that lack the insights from the data. And I don't see a shortage in tactically experienced data scientists, those on the left side of the grid. And you'll see here the population is very high. It doesn't even get that small when you get to machine learning. But when it comes to direct project experience, then it tapers off a bit. But also look in project experience where the value is coming up, but not that much because you may be reinforcing experience in doing things the wrong way. So I only give that half credit because it's not until you learn a strategic process for undertaking, building an organizational practice in a full-scale analytic operation that you're really starting to bring some value to the organization. And then you see the next one there is organizational implementation. And look how few really understand how to run a strategic process. And that's making sure that you're involving anybody who's contributing to or benefiting from the analytic function. And then the organizational implementation means that you understand how to bring all of the broader aspects together of more complex environments, broader resources, different roles that are involved on the analytics team, when and how they apply at certain parts of the process. I'll give you one quick example. The subject matter expert. Absolutely need them to understand how the data was collected. What data can we even trust? And another question coming in. We'll wrap that one in. Thanks, Ricky. I know we're going to go over time a little bit. And you can imagine how we go over time when we've got 3 different perspectives to share. And we've still got all 6 of you who managed to get in through that reverse osmosis that's set up here today. So the pool gets very small with those who understand how to stand up what's really an analytic modeling factory. And the organizations that allow the time to set up more of a factory get the greatest benefit because once you have a factory set, it makes sense that the operational lines you have, the assembly lines you have within that factory can churn out models that are not just accurate. That's not the big sexy thing here. Oh, I know where I jumped off track earlier was the mechanics, right? You have all these mechanics that can tune these engines to be superior and have great accuracy. But if there's nobody out there assessing the conditions of the track, the rules of the race, what it takes to win, you don't get a trophy for being a great mechanic. You have to work with a pit crew, a management team. You have to understand driving technique. You've got to understand what it takes to win that race. And then you need to productionalize the whole thing once you understand what it takes to win the race. Let's make sure that's repeatable. And then you can be far more efficient at coming out with low risk, high impact implementations very efficiently, but you have to slow down to build that factory first. And that's what so many organizations aren't investing in. They're so concentrated on the results for the end of the quarter or making sure that we get early results and come up with custom models again and again, and they don't align with what's important to the organization or what leadership will really appreciate and adopt. So that's where you see here the value jumps so precipitously after, when we start getting into looking at implementation strategically, looking at it at the organizational level, and then building the analytics leadership skills and soft skills to be able to run that operation and pull you're working really as a translator between all the different roles and to do it in a purposeful way. So that SME example to return to, and I apologize jumping around here. I didn't want to miss the other point. So here's one example of how you work with teams in a very purposeful way. The subject matter expert can tell you so much about the way that the data was collected and its quality and how much you can trust certain attributes. And many times they will be very helpful in letting you know, what are the nature of these outliers? Because when we work with predictive analytics, oftentimes we're working with low incidence, high impact occurrences. And so outliers can often be not just errors. Many times they're the points of greatest interest. And so if we understand those kind of things, we can prepare data in a way that's going to preserve the predictive value of the data that you've collected, not trim some of the content that may have had the greatest predictive value. However, if you include that SME when you come into the modeling effort, or if the SME is the modeler, the subject matter expert is the modeler, they can end up adding bias to an otherwise objective model, and you lose a lot of the benefit of that objectivity that the model brings. But then you want them again at the end to help interpret those results. What do they mean? And then prepare them in a way that leadership will consume. And that means having interviewed them at the beginning, not coming up with the visualizations that you think are interesting or stunning or beautiful. They have to be translated in ways that will surely be interpreted by leadership. So this visualization shows also how we distinguish our training from a lot of the other training that's out there. And it's not that we compete against it. A lot of the on-demand training that's out there, whether it's before or after hours, whether you go out and see the trees and then come to the forest to understand how to navigate the forest, we can make sense of how to wrap all that stuff together and organize it, or take the strategic to have the forest view and decide which trees you want to concentrate on for the purposes of the nature of the problems that you have in your organization. So we're a few minutes over. For those who will stick around, I'll take another question here. This comes from Ricky. What's more important for a good analytics professional? Is it active intelligence or enhanced perception of the data, or both? If so, what's the proportion? And another one from Karen around CRISP. What's more important for a good, is it active intelligence or enhanced perception of the data? I'm trying to, I can see a couple of different ways to interpret that. Active intelligence or enhanced perception. So does active intelligence mean you already understand how it was derived? You maybe are the subject matter expert. You've got your hands in the data. And the other is the data has been collected and handed to you, and you maybe have an idea of what it means. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, Ricky? While okay. So let me think about that for a moment. Active intelligence, enhanced perception of the data. What's more important? Okay, let me answer it this way. I think what's most important, well, first is to be aware of which intelligence you have. Do you have a perception of the data, or do you have active intelligence? If you don't have active intelligence, you're probably not the subject matter expert, or those who collect the data or are responsible for the data. And so what I think is most important is to first have that awareness of which camp are you in. And if it's the perception side, make sure you understand how to interview the person with the active intelligence so that you really understand the dynamics of the data, which fields can be trusted, how to transform, how to derive new variables. I'll give you a quick example there. You may have dates, maybe a begin date and an ending date, or a birth date and a date of transaction, or a date of medical procedure or something. And those dates wouldn't mean that much to certain kinds of analytic models, but duration does. So you would derive a new variable, to take the start date minus the end date or the transaction date, and now you have a duration, and that may have far more predictive value, but it wasn't a variable that was available within the data. So that's one kind of strategic aspect where you work with the subject matter expert to understand the data, understand the nature of the problem. What are other fields that could be derived from the existing data to make the fuel far more concentrated and impactful for the nature of the problem that you're going to approach? So I would say that it's an awareness of which do you bring to the game. And if you're on the perception side, make sure you converse with, and again, this comes down to the soft skills part. And I gotta say, when it comes to soft skills, that's not what a lot of practitioners are seeking. And it's kind of the icky part, right? They love to dive into the data. Who doesn't? We love algorithms. We love software. We love toiling in the data. But again, looking at this chart, if you're not working on the right side of this chart, then not only are you not bringing a lot of value to your organization, you're also not progressing as a professional. And look at the small pool of those in those upper categories. Pardon me. If you're really, looking if you're looking to advance your career, you want to move into those spaces because that's where you're really going to add benefit. And as Keith had said, some of these things, a lot of practitioners think, well, hey, I know artificial intelligence, I know, decision trees and neural networks and genetic algorithms, and now you're going to tell me to think about deployment before we deploy, or to have fun conversations with other people on the team and kumbaya. I'll tell you what, if you're not doing these things in a coordinated way, and you don't have the soft skills to pull this together and come up with the prioritized list of validated projects. And that means, most organizations have ideas of 2 or 3 projects that may be coming up. You need to pull leadership in, coach them on how to ask questions of the data, and then understand which are most important to the organization. Now, instead of 2 or 3 potential problems, you have 15, maybe 20, 24, a couple dozen potential problems. And then when you run them through the strategic qualifiers that we had talked about earlier, they filter back down to maybe 3, 4, or 5 that are even valid. Then how do you prioritize them? And once you prioritize them, now you have the lowest risk, highest impact. It's almost like you're cheating. It's like you're bringing the future into the present to not only find which are most viable, but once you get results, which are going to have the greatest impact for the organization. And there's so few who can do that. And that is where there's an extreme shortage of talent. And that's where there is no bar, going back to Karen's question. The bar is very high on them. They're asking all sorts of questions around, machine learning and, what do you know about this algorithm, and what have you done in Python and R, and giving coding quizzes and the rest. And again, better mechanics, and they end up coming up with a vehicle that runs far faster than anybody else. Off course, it's 45 degrees off course, but it's going at a high rate of speed. So until organizations understand how to ask the questions on the right side of this diagram, and how to really decipher who are the posers as data scientists that are self-proclaimed data scientists. And I would say I would far more go for a generalist than somebody who is deeply involved in simply machine learning. We need more race car drivers and leaders than we do mechanics. That's where TMA's training is involved. And I have to admit, it's not an easy sell for the reasons I expressed earlier. More practitioners, and I hope this doesn't sound condescending at all, but they're more in looking at the candy of data and algorithm software as opposed to the medicine of strategic process, organizational implementation, analytics leadership. You're right, Karen, organizations don't know to ask for that. So even those who traipse into this, it takes a bit of selling for them to understand how much value is really brought by those. Let me see if I left anything out here. Karen, one of your slides on CRISP, can you explain how this works? At 20 till, for those of you willing to stick around, I'll give a real quick overview on it. So CRISP, we are big fans of CRISP. It's the cross-industry standard process for data mining. And it comes up with a formalized approach of tasks, phases and tasks, which you may have noticed from our modeling practice framework, very similar. So we're such fans of CRISP, and we give full attribution to it, that we created a modeling practice framework around CRISP because CRISP will step through a practitioner at the project level, starting with a number of strategic considerations, such as the first phase is called business understanding. That's where we want to understand what are the analytic goals. Let's form the team. Let's talk with leadership. What do we want this project to achieve? Then it goes into data understanding, which you need to do before going into actually preparing the data or building the models. And it's great that it does that. I mean, it makes a statement. There's a lot of software out there that automates model building, and it automates it far too much. It automates the data preparation aspects. And I already gave the example as to if you overlook some of the ways to transform your data and understand it before you transform it, you're going to lop off a lot of the greatest value that could be driving your analytic models and aligning it to the problem at hand. So CRISP addresses those, and it steps you through, it outlines all the specific tasks you should take in order to succeed at a project, everything you should consider. It's fantastic. Where we improved upon it, where we were motivated to do so, and not replace it. It is well within the modeling practice framework. And again, we give full credit to CRISP. But it needed an additional layer, and as active direct consultants in large organizations, what we found was CRISP, first of all, it assumes that the project that you're going to do is valid, and it doesn't look at larger organizational issues such as the organizational culture. Such as broader places to bring in resources and evaluate them. The broader assessment that should be done across talent and resources and environment and culture and mindset shift is a major aspect. If we know that the culture is workable, there will be some discomfort that we've got to anticipate, and that's part of what we want to express in the process. And that's why we want to populate a few good project ideas to a couple of dozen, so that we have the ability to weather many that are going to be disqualified or deprioritized, and then work on those ones that are not just going to be adopted by the organization, but which ones, like Keith had presented, are the right size. We're not trying to boil the ocean or do the low-hanging fruit that you succeed on something so small that it doesn't really make an echo. So we have to look at all of those aspects. And when you look at, we have over a dozen major strategic qualifiers. There's tasks within each of them. But by the time you go through all of those, like I say, those 2 dozen do come down to just 3 or 5. But now you've got the 3 or 5 that can really survive through full implementation, and go through deployment and monitoring and wait for the results to come back. And now we know how to measure those. We know how to translate them into financial impact and present those to leadership. That's when we close that full loop. So CRISP is the project level formal tasks that are phased out, to take a project from beginning to end. And the modeling agency's modeling practice framework is the larger wrapper around CRISP DM that helps with the organizational level, looking at standing up an organizational practice or operation as opposed to just a single project. So it's the assembly line versus the factory. And we're looking at the factory. We want to enable an organization to run its own internal practice or operation with measurable impact that's adopted and comes up with continual, that concentrated high degree of return for its analytic effort, because that should not be outsourced. The organizations own the data. They have more than enough technical talent. They really need guidance in how to stand up and run an organizational operation that's completely value focused. So hopefully that answers all the questions. It looks like that is the end of the questions, and we went 15 minutes over. Look at the 6 of you, so dedicated, very flattered. Hope that means you got some great value out of the, not just the Q&A, but the event itself. But at this time, we are going to wrap up, and be sure to check out the website and look at the schedule for our upcoming productions for the live experiential courses starting September 11th in Washington, D.C., and October 19th is when the analytics-driven organization starts. And on behalf of myself, Keith, and Scott, thank you again for attending Predictive Analytics Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon and evening, and this brings the webinar to a close.